Father, Paul prays, he says, "For this reason I kneel before the Father, from whom the whole family in heaven and earth derive his name. I pray, Lord, that out of your glorious riches, that you can strengthen all of us here in this body with the power through your Spirit in our inner being, so that, Lord, Christ may dwell in our hearts through faith, and that we, Lord, that being rooted and established in love, may have the power, together with all the saints, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, and that you may be filled to the measure of the fullness of God." We're going to talk about a few things having to do specifically with that prayer. But the main subject, the topic that we're on, is a series of 4 messages. You've heard 2. This is the 3rd one. Tim's going to share the 4th one next week. The first one was the designer's design. Bill Haydorn talked about how God is our designer, and he is in community. And we are made in his image. And for us to be a partaker in the same kind of image of God, we also are called to community. Of course, God calls us to community with him through his Son, Jesus Christ. But he also calls us to community with each other. And that's an important aspect of being a follower of Christ. Then Nate talked about I need you, which is extending not just this command to be in community, but also giving you 2 good reasons why you should be in community. One was to spur one another on. To encourage each other. Come here to this service to hear God's word being preached, to be encouraged, but also to support one another in something that would be outside of this body, which is in life groups or in coffee meetings or men's groups or women's ministries. He says, don't forsake gathering as a body. And there was a warning in Nate's message as well, and the warning was that if we do, that we are more likely to be sort of isolated. We're more likely to be weaker in our faith and be less encouraged, and therefore we could be picked off by the devil, who is a roaring lion, who is waiting to devour. And the example he gave was of the gazelle, the weak one in the herd that gets picked off because it's isolated, as opposed to the strong one that's in the middle of the herd. Today we're going to talk about a topic that you might think is not specifically to do with community, except that it's got the word all in it. And the word love. Of course, you might think, of course, community and love are related. Communities are relationships, love's an inner relationship. But hopefully, in this message, you're going to find out that without love, you're going to have a very difficult time being in the kind of community that God intended for us. Inside the core of God is a divine community, a divine love. God loves the Son. A son loves the Father. And we may not ever get a full grasp of what that is until we get to heaven. But what Jesus tells us is that if we love others as he loved us, we get to look at what that kind of love is. And if you have been having a struggle in having the joyous Christian life, the life that he promised would be, that joy would be in us and that joy would be made full and complete. What I'm going to challenge you today is that the missing part of what you might not have is an understanding of what Christ's kind of love is and how that might help us in our relationships in our community. Love is a pretty common word. People use it for all kinds of things. They use it for ice cream. They use it for families. They use it for I love my kids. I love my wife. It's a word that I think we need to understand clearly. What we're going to find in the message today is that there's at least 2 ways to look at it. One is the kind of love that we're typically involved in, and then there's a Jesus kind of love, and that's what I want to draw your attention to during this message. When we get into gatherings, social gatherings of any kind, the critical ingredient that we need to include in those gatherings, those kind of relationships, is going to be this love that Jesus talks about. So we want, so I want to help clarify the kind of love. There's going to be at least 3 different looks at love. We're going to look at our love, we're going to look at the excellence of love, and then we're going to look at Jesus' type of love in this message. We go to the next slide. We're going to start with exhortation to love one another. This is from chapter 13 in John. We're going to spend time in chapter 13, verses 1 through 15. That's going to be the core of the message. But before I get there, I want to talk a little bit about different kinds of love that we might be aware of. The key here is Jesus. This is the day before he's going to be crucified. And he's leaving this earth, and he's got his 12 disciples with him, and he says to them, "A new commandment I give you." This is one day before the end of his ministry. He's going to tell them something that's absolutely critical for them. And he says, "The commandment I give you is love one another. And love one another as I have loved you." So we need to understand what this kind of love that Jesus is talking about. Even as I have loved you, that you love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Typically, when we're thinking about love, if we go to the next slide, we go to, so Jesus commanded us to love one another. Next slide, please. Typically, when we think about love, we are, in the earthly sense, we're talking about a sort of a quid pro quo kind of love. A love where it's a functional relationship. You love somebody in order to get something back. That's not the kind of love that is the divine love that Jesus is talking about. In Luke chapter 6, it describes this kind of love. I've got in the notes there 1 Corinthians chapter 11, 1 through 15, and that's a contrast of a kind of love that Paul has for the Corinthian church as opposed to the love of false apostles. And you should read that. It's a little bit of a longer section. I wanted to just get to the heart of it here so that we have more time for for learning more about Jesus' kind of love. But if you read this, it says, "If you love those who love you, what credit is that for you?" This reminds me of when we talk about if you have faith, so what? Even the demons have faith and they tremble, right? So if you love those who love you, what credit is that for you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners in order to receive back the same amount. And typically in our relationships, even in our family relationships, sometimes we have a love for our kids as long as they do what we want them to do. We love our wife as long as she loves us in the way that we want to be loved. And if that sort of relationship and that agreement falls apart, we feel like sometimes we can walk away from that relationship, and that's not at all the biblical kind of love that Jesus calls us for. Before we get into specifics about Jesus' kind of love, I just want to go to a very famous passage, of course, in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, where he talks about excellence in love. This is a passage that usually shows up at weddings and anniversaries. It was on my wedding card when we sent it out, and it talks about the highest form of love that one can have. And he says, or the highest form of, where love falls into category with things like faith and hope and other things. And what he says here is, Paul says, "If I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I have become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and know all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to move mountains," these are amazing things, right? "But I do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all my possessions," imagine that, "to feed the poor, and if I surrender my body to be burned, but do not have love, it profits me nothing." Love is patient. Let's stop there for a second. One of the things that I struggle with in my life is patience. And I remember that, sorry, somebody else also struggles with patience over there. So one of the things I struggle with in my life is patience. And I remember, and one of the things about patience is I used to sort of say, okay, fine, I'm going to work at being more patient, probably doing it in my own flesh. What that meant to me was instead of getting mad in 1 minute, I'd get mad in about 5 minutes, I'd get frustrated. And I remember that one time we were going on vacation, and we're getting in the car, and we all sort of, sometimes we do this, we prayed and said, "Hey, God, help us have a good time together." And the reason we would pray, I think, is because every time we'd go on a trip like that, I would get upset at some point during the drive, especially if it was a long trip. And so I think my wife pointed this out to me, and then she pointed out to me, is not only sometimes, but it's pretty much every time that we go on a trip like that. And I thought to myself, it can't possibly be. And I was thinking back the last few trips, and yeah, sure enough, I could sort of pick the time when I got upset. It wasn't very long. And then I went back even further, and I really couldn't remember a time when I'd gone on a vacation with the kids where I hadn't lost at some point. And so, God showed me. He says, okay, well, you really need to do something different here. And you can't just put a time limit on this. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to wait another 5 minutes or an extra hour, because you could always tell yourself, look, I'm being patient. Now this is way too much. I can't be expected to wait any longer. But what he told me is, he says, every time you get the urge to lose your cool, something happens that frustrates you, gets you upset, just say, it's no big deal. It's a simple thing. It's not very biblical. It's not very profound. But it was something that I did. Every time something happened, and I'm sure it happened like within 5 minutes of getting out, somebody forgot something, we had to come back to the house or whatever, and I just said, it's no big deal. And it wasn't a big deal. And it was one of the best vacations we ever had. Love is patient, love is kind, it's not jealous. Love does not brag and is not arrogant. It does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own, it's not provoked. It does not take into account a wrong suffered. That, in the new NIV translation, means it does not keep a record of wrongs. A lot of times in our relationships, we keep a record of wrongs. We have a list of things that we pull out. The minute something goes wrong, we say, hey, remember when, blah, 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 blah. My memory is fading, so I'm getting a lot better at that situation. But so God's working on me. That's one way He can work on me. But, we remember everything sometimes in our relationships, and we go way back. And that is not an act of love. And one of the things that we do in our household is that we are supposed to say not just that I'm sorry about something, but you're supposed to go to the next step and you say, please forgive me. And that's a very, very hard thing to do. But it's that next extra step that makes you a little more humble and says, look, I'm sorry, or would you please forgive me? And then when the person forgives, the understanding is that they have forgiven once, right? Back home in India, where I come from, you don't just apologize once. You apologize like 100 times. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Then about 5 minutes later, you do it again, and then it loses its meaning, right? But here we're talking about a situation where we're asked to enter into relationships where if somebody has wronged you, right, if you love them, you don't keep a record of that. I want to hold on to that. We'll get back to that thought in a second, because one of the things that struck me with this verse, of course, was, God is love, right? So does God keep a record of wrongs? No, He doesn't. But then how does that factor into the point that we actually sin and we rebel against Him? We'll get back to that in a slide or two. Love does not rejoice in unrighteousness. Love is patient, love is does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth, bears all things, believes all things. Bears all things means protects, believes all things, trusts, hopes all things, endures all things. This is the kind of love that Paul talks about. Next slide. Love never fails. That's a promise that God's made. That's a very bold statement for somebody to say something will never happen. Right? What he's saying is that if you practice the kind of love that I'm talking about, that it will accomplish its purpose. It will never fail. That's a very strong statement to be made, and that's the kind of love that God is asking us to have. If there are gifts of prophecy, they'll be done away. If there are tongues, they will cease. If there's knowledge, it will be done away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will be done away. When I was a child, I used to speak like a child, think like a child. When I became a man, I did away with childish things. Go to the next slide. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face, and now I know in part, but then I know fully, just as I also have been fully known. But now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. If you go back one slide, this is a little complicated statement here, but all he's saying is that love is eternal. That is going to exist in heaven. When we go to heaven, there's a song that says, heaven's a place where nothing really happens. That's not true. It's not boring. Heaven is going to be a place where we're going to see that one characteristic of being loved and being fully in love relationship with God. And what he's saying here is that tongues and prophecy and knowledge are all things that are based on the fact that we don't know fully. We're still childlike in our faith. We see in a mirror, but we don't see the full picture. And all these things, which are the gifts, this was written to the Corinthian church to sort of admonish them for paying too much attention and arguing about spiritual gifts. All these things will go away. But that thing that we're going to have in heaven, that God is inviting us to partake in and participate in relationships, right here, is that love. And I want us to understand what that kind of love is and what it means for our relationships. Next slide, please. And the next. Okay. So 2 things about God's love. For God so loved the world, right, that he gave. That's an action. It's not just a feeling, right? God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. And this goes back to the God not keeping any record of wrongs. The reason God doesn't keep a record of your wrongs is because Jesus paid the price for your sins. And now he's erased those records. And when he sees you, if you put your faith in him, if you trust him, whoever believes in him will not perish because his wrongs have been stricken from the record. Okay? That's a form of love that we are called to. We're called to forgive others because he forgave us. Right? If you ever have a difficult time forgiving somebody, take a look at God. Take a look at Jesus. Look at him. Go to the Holy Spirit and ask him to show you what he has forgiven you for. And hopefully, the veil will be lifted from your eyes. Next slide, please. And Philippians 2:3, a different look at what kind of love, and we sort of start to see the glimpse of how this relational love that I'm going to be talking about, the Jesus kind of love, and that is do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit. Don't be self-centered in your relationships. Conceit is also something that's focused on the self. But with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. That's the kind of love that we're going to be talking about that Jesus is asking us to have. The love, the object of that love, the object of the affection, you're interested in the good for that person. Not what they can do for you, not how it makes you feel. It's not a warm, fuzzy feeling. It's not you know what, I did such a wonderful thing for somebody, look how great I am, which is the way a lot of times I approach things that I do for people that I think are good. I want to tell somebody, hey, guess what I did? That person needed something and I gave it to them. That's not the kind of love we're talking about. The Jesus kind of love is with the good of the other person in mind. And sometimes that can be tough love, too. I know in a relationship I was with a friend of mine some time ago, I was afraid to tell him that he was in sin, that he was in a situation that was going to be difficult and dangerous for him and his marriage. And I had a very hard time doing that. And the kind of love that Jesus is talking about is one where you look at that individual and say, what's good for them? And then it changes the fear into a courage. It turns the whole perspective around about how you would relate to somebody and how you would love them. Next slide, please. So we're going to go into a section of scripture, John 13. So if you go, turn with your Bibles to John 13. I just want to get the setting here on John 13 for you. We'll read it, and what you're going to see here is something that is called the full extent of Jesus' love. It's in the upper room. He's got his 12 disciples there, and he's getting ready for the Passover meal. The Passover meal represents the sacrificial lamb that was slain in Egypt when the Israelites were in Egypt, and the blood of the lamb would be placed on the door so that God would pass over that house and not kill the firstborn in that house. Jesus, of course, is the Passover lamb. He's the lamb for all of us, so that God will not hold us accountable for our sins. He is the ultimate sacrificial lamb for the whole world. It turns out it's also the night before he is going to be crucified. 1 day away, Jesus is 1 day away from leaving this earth, essentially being nailed to a cross. 1 day away. And the people in that room are arguing about who's going to be first. Who's going to sit on his left? Who's going to sit on his right? This is what he's looking at, right? Peter is having trouble comprehending what's going on, and when you'll see in the passage, he doesn't even understand sometimes what Jesus is trying to do. And Jesus also knows that Peter is going to deny him in a few days. Judas is in the room. This is the setting, the day before. And Jesus enters this, and instead of coming up with some amazing power to show them that he is who he is, and don't worry, instead of getting the angels to show up and bow down and worship him so that they know for a fact, he's got to leave them with something that's going to turn the world around, that's going to be the keys to his kingdom. And what he leaves them with is an act that we'll read in John 13. Go ahead and read with me. It was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. This could be portending to what's going to happen in the day, but also showing them right there on the spot, now, the full extent of his love. He's going to do something. I think you guys know what it is, but what I want you to see here is the kind of love that we're being called to do. And it's not a mystery. Jesus shows it. He shows it to his disciples. It's not going to be a mystery to us. We're not going to be confused about how to love people when we see what Jesus does. The evening meal was served. The devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew the Father had put all things under his power, everything, the angels, like I said. They could have been called in a moment's notice. He could have turned the world upside down at that point. And that he'd come from God and he was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, and what did he do? He took off his outer clothing and he wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet. I come from India. I grew up there. I was 18 years in India. In the summers, we used to go to my dad's village, and it was basically sand dunes and dirt roads. There was no, we'd sometimes get stuck in the mud. We'd have to push the car out in the rains. But you get pretty dirty in those kinds of situations. And there was always a basin of water that was there in almost every household. You walk into that house, you could put your feet in the basin of water, there'd be a towel, you wipe your feet. In that particular situation, nobody was washing anybody's feet. But I also saw in the Army, my dad was an officer in the Army, that a lot of times at the end of the day, after the whole day was over, the lowest ranking private in the Army would sometimes take a pail of water, sometimes warm water, and then use that water to wash the officer's feet. In that setting, it was absolutely clear who was the master, who was the Lord, and who was the servant. Because the master was sitting on the chair, and the servant was kneeling down and serving him. And it never struck me when I used to see those things when I was a kid, because it was just normal. But now I think if I go back there, the profound nature of that relationship would have a different kind of impact on me. That's what we're talking about here, what Jesus is doing. He poured water into the basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He's showing them something. He's showing them how to love one another, how to serve one another. By actually not just telling them, but by doing it. The master of the universe, kneeling down, while his disciples sat on the chair. He's washing and wiping their feet. He comes to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, he knows. Simon's not we give him a bad rap. He got it right away. He says, this is crazy. What are you doing? Why are you washing my feet, right? And Jesus replies, he says, you don't realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand. No, said Peter, you'll never wash my feet. Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you have no part of me. Then Lord, Simon says, he goes the other way, swings the pendulum 180 degrees. He says, not just my feet, but wash my hands and my head as well. And Jesus says, a person who has had a bath only needs to wash his feet. His whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you. For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said, not everyone was clean. When he finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. And he asked them, he says, "Do you understand what I've done for you?" He asked them, "You call me teacher," not just teacher, right? "And Lord." Lord is reserved for God, right? They knew he was God, not just teacher. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am." Right? It's an I am sentence. "Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet," right? This is the message for us, right? You should wash one another's feet. "I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth, no servant is greater than his master." What he's saying is, if you're my servants, you have to do this because I'm your master. I did it. You're not greater than me. You have to serve one another in exactly the same way. "Nor is the messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." Okay? Jesus demonstrated a kind of love here that is sacrificial, humble, and one of service. That's the full extent of his love. And he shows it to us. It's not, like I said, it's not complicated. It's very simple. It means you consider others more important than yourself. It means you consider their good, not your good, in a relationship. Next slide, please. Take another look at this. John 13, 34, 35, right? "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another." Right? That's the community aspect of this, right? When you come to this body, this church, this service, you're in community. It's the loving one another. There's so much you can do in this kind of a setting. You can't get to know everybody. You meet your friends. You may exchange some niceties. Sometimes we have our good guy masks on in our meetings. How are things? Everything's fine. Bill talked about that. Everything's great. But really, to love somebody, you got to get to know them. And that setting has got to be in a group that's a little bit more private, a little more personal, a little more intimate. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about home groups. We're in a home group. We've been in a home group for about 9 months now. We're starting to get to know each other. The objective of this home group is to grow to a certain size and then bless others by opening it up and branching into 2 other home groups. And that's the intent. It's not just about ourselves, but also to bless others. But to get to a level of intimacy where we can share what's going on in our lives. And I'm starting to get to know the men and the women in this group. And maybe they're not the kind of people that you initially would have picked to be in your home group. You know, oh my gosh, I don't want to be in that person's home group. And what you find is when you get to know them, and God breaks down those barriers between you and them, and you get to know that they've got hurts and pains, and that you can be a blessing to them, and they can be a blessing to you, and you have hurts and pains, and you feel like you can share, and you have that trust. That's the kind of community that God has designed us for. That's the kind of community that's the core of who God is. And God has said that in that community, in those relationships, we have to love one another with His kind of love. If you want to do that, if you want to love people, if you want to follow His commands, right, you have to be in a relationship. How are you going to get into that relationship, that intimate relationship? And He's talking about us, right? He says, I have loved you that you may also love one another. Why? So that all men, and that's where it goes to the rest of the world, so that they can know that you're my disciples. It's something that sets us apart. The fact that we come to this building doesn't necessarily set us apart. Some people have a very warped view of what goes on in this building, and they don't want any part of it. But when they see your love in action, in home groups, in neighborhoods, in communities, when they see you living it out in such a way that's not self-centered, He says, they will know that you are my disciples. Here's the point. Jesus' kind of love is essential for community. You're not going to have community. There's no point in having community. There's no point in getting together if you're not going to have an opportunity to express this kind of love, to participate in that kind of love. And what's even cooler about that is That this is the kind of love that Jesus says is at the core of who I am. It's that sacrificial love. Next slide, please. How do you do it? How do you practice this kind of love? Let me give you a few practical things that I thought about. You can write them down. It implies sacrifice and service, and it's for their good, remember? Examine your relationships. There's somebody's written a book says relationships, a mess worth making. I read the title, it's a cool title. I read the first chapter, it's a cool chapter. I'm going to continue reading that book. I haven't read the whole thing, but it's just something, I know that relationships are messy, right? They cost, they take time, they take effort. Examine your relationship that you're currently in. Examine relationships that God is asking you to be in. Go to Jesus. Ask for direction about these relationships. Pray. Ask Him to show you your position in these relationships. If there's any sin involved, if there's any distortion of how He wants you to be in these kinds of relationships. And surrender your knee-jerk responses and attitudes. Because sometimes if we're not intentional, our automatic response, until God has refined it in us, is not always the appropriate one. I was in Home Depot yesterday, and I was getting some paint, and I had a little swab that had to be matched. And this gentleman was helping a lady, and I was next in line. And God bless him. He was doing a great job. He was very, very focused on serving her, right? And you could tell. He was a good employee. You can tell the employees are there just to go through the motions, right? Which is not what God wants us to be. He wants us to be the kind of employees that will really love the customer, right? Or his people. So this guy was just going through in great detail, and I was waiting and waiting and waiting that he would notice me, and he was just, and it was 10 minutes before my turn was going to come, and I even texted Teresa. I said, man, I've been waiting here 10 minutes, I can't believe it. I'm not, like I said, a very patient person. So the guy looks up, and doesn't look at me, because he's focused. He didn't know I was there, because he was helping her, and this other lady cuts right in front of me. And to me, that's like, that's open season, right? I want to go up to her, and I want to tap her, right, and say, excuse me, but were you next in line? Which is a clever way of saying you're not next in line, right? It's not very clever. Okay. And I'm looking around, I'm thinking to myself, here I've been preparing for this message about loving other people, right? And I'm going to love her by just letting her be first. Maybe she's got something that's going on in her life that she didn't notice me, and that she needs to be, and I was telling the first service, I wish I'd done something phenomenal, like told her, hey, I'm letting you go first because Jesus loves you and He's got a wonderful plan for your life. I didn't do that, right? She didn't come to Christ, but maybe somewhere deep down inside, maybe the other woman saw me, or the guy behind the paint counter saw me. You don't know who's looking, but you'll be obedient in that situation. You say, okay, God, I'm going to surrender my response, my attitude, and I'm going to go with your kind of love. That's a small example of how He is. Read God's Word, right? Understand His ways and live like He did, right? And ask Him for the Spirit to fill you and for Him to be in control of your life. Next slide. We're right at the home stretch here. If we go to the next slide, we're going to finish. So, we want to grow, we want to mature, and we struggle, okay? The comment, the claim here is, if you grow, to grow in Christ, you've got to grow in His kind of love. That's the way to grow in Christ. You can read the Bible all you want. You can prophesy all you want. You can speak in tongues. You can give everything you have to the poor. But if you want to grow, if you want to experience that joy, that complete joy, the way to do it is to grow in His kind of love. And He's shown us, it's not a mystery what that kind of love is. That love has the good of the other person, the object, at its forefront. And the last two bullets I'll say is, examine your relationships. Who are we in relationship with? That's not for our gain. Which sacrificial relationships are you involved in today? Until we do that, until we're in that kind of relationship where we're putting others first, we're not actually practicing this kind of love. And therefore, the message is we're not actually enjoying the fruit of what Jesus has left behind on this earth for us. Remember, the very last day, he gave us an example and a commandment to love one another. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, there's no mystery, Lord. Your word is clear. You want us to draw all men unto you. We're a letter, Lord, an aroma. And you've given us a perfectly wonderful way in which we can be that attractive aroma to this world that's dying without you. And the way to do it, Father, is to understand the true nature of your love, Lord. And Father, I just pray that as we're here and as we take communion in the coming minutes, Lord, that you will show us relationships that we're in right now, Father, that can be dramatically changed, raised to a new level, only so that we too, Lord, can experience the full joy of knowing who you are and the love that you enjoy within your Trinity, within your community, and that you've given to us because we're made in your image. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.